end of the day, so we're going to talk money. We're talking money. We're going to make some money here. All right, raise your hand out there if you have ever pitched a venture capitalist. No? Come on. Who here has ever pitched a corporate venture capitalist? All right, so we're gonna introduce some folks to a very hot area in the area of venture capital. Forbes magazine recently, we did a survey. 17% of venture capital is invested by corporations. And that totals about $5 billion we're estimating this year. So there's a huge pool of money out there, and we have the 4 people controlling most of it, some of it, a lot of it. I'll let them introduce themselves. Maybe we'll start, we'll start with Vinay here.
Okay, so I'm Vinay. I head up something called the Commercial Growth Fund for a UK broadcaster called Channel 4. Channel 4 is a traditional broadcaster. It's free to air. It makes all of its money from advertising. It makes about £1 billion, so that's 1.6 US. I've got a unique model. So we don't actually...
Profit? 1.6 billion profit?
No, revenue.
Revenue, all right.
Revenue. Actually, it's owned by the government, and the profits are reinvested into creating content. So any surplus I make or I make on behalf of the company gets reinvested into the model. So we don't actually run to make a profit. We run to maximize returns, which gets reinvested into content. The model I have is pretty unique in the corporate venturing world, I'd say. So we trade our airtime. So I'd find a high-growth, consumer-facing company, typically non-strategic. But sometimes we're looking at some content-based companies, which I'd argue are strategic. We give them checks of between 3 and 5 million US of airtime per annum, and then we take passive equity stakes in them. And so I'm looking at high-growth, digital-first type companies, which are probably a bit late to TV, or even anti-TV. And you know, I'm covering marketplaces, mobile, e-commerce, content, publishing.
So you can give them an instant jumbo advertising package. Got it. Good stuff. Maurizio.
Okay.
Tell us about yourself.
I'm the boss of the Italian startup mafia. No, I'm joking. I'm founder. It's good, yeah? Okay. I'm founder of a campus, founder of H-Farm. H-Farm is a campus based in the northeast. Northeast of Italy is a very entrepreneurial region where most of the GDP of our country comes from. And it's 11 years old. It's a public listed company since 6 months. And within this campus, we foster digital entrepreneurship. We have an incubator, we have an accelerator, co-working. We do a lot of business with corporations. We're probably one of the first private incubator for profit that is addressing a lot to the corporation, to the digital transformation for corporates. And we're investing a lot into the education, which is the next generation of the workforce, which is the next generation of entrepreneurs. So this is about H-Farm. It's a platform, but it's especially a small ecosystem and environment. That's how I can describe. Sometimes I say it's a zoo or a safari. That makes much more idea of what we are.
Thank you. Excellent. Simon.
Hi, my name is Simon. I run a venture capital firm called Rakuten Ventures, and of course, the mother company is called Rakuten. Rakuten Group is kind of, the easiest way to explain Rakuten to a lot of people is it's kind of the 21st century conglomerate for the country of Japan. We have maybe 30 or 40 different subsidiaries. We run a very tight moat and castle strategy through our e-commerce business, our travel business, our fintech businesses, which basically consummates into a company in the middle of about $18 to $20 billion market cap. And outside of that, we were trying to figure out 3 years ago what kind of business can we actually set up outside of Japan that can become sustainable, and it is a differentiating factor for our business. And actually, that was venture capital. So in many ways, yes, we are a CVC, we're a corporate venture capital, but we run our business exactly like a commercial venture capital firm in that we're beholden to our LP, our singular LP, through our performances of our portfolio companies. So we've been active for about 3 years. We run about $285 million through a team of 4 people, and we have 85 of that for Japan and 200 for the world.
Hi, so I'm Pratik, Bose. I'm part of the Cisco Investments Group. Cisco, as a technology company, actually has been doing corporate venture activity since 1993. So it's over the years, it's done about 200 odd investments in the venture capital space, separate to the acquisitions, which also the same team actually handles, which is about $2 billion worth of active portfolio as of today. A lot of the investments are synergistic to Cisco, and we began out and still are, I would say, primarily a strategic investor. But over the years, our model has also evolved, as has corporate venturing, where we invest into areas which do not have immediate synergies with Cisco, and constantly define themes, trends, as well as geographies, where we can invest to just enable the innovation with an intent to partner and harvest in the long term doing so. With that in mind, as of now, Cisco invests more outside North America than it does back in the US, which is part of the reason I'm actually here, based out of here.
Good.
Thank you.
So here's how I see CVC, and you guys will, maybe we can elaborate on this. You basically, if you boil it down, you have four ways to invest. One, you're looking at something that's core to your corporate, your corporate interests. One that would have strategic value. Pratik, you just talked about that. One that has potential for the future, might be strategic in the future, something you might want to keep an eye on, and then purely financial. So that's a lot, again, traditional VC, how am I going to, we might have an area we specialize in, but where am I going to get the biggest return? Here, you have kind of got 4 different baskets. I'm probably, maybe we start with you because you just discussed, how do you balance those strategies and kind of which ones do you, how do you kind of allocate?
It's a tough question, actually, Randall, because I would say that even Cisco doesn't have a final answer. And if you look at the industry, so, as Sam was describing to you, Rakuten, so it has decided a particular model. If you look at Cisco, there is no hard, specific allocation in terms of a fund. All the money is coming out of the balance sheet. But 3+ years back, we decided we're not just going to do only strategic investments. And we started defining theme areas where we would do investments which do not have impact back to Cisco immediately. So going back to the last 2 categories that you named, Randall, these would fall under that. They are for the future potential. So but it does come back and have an impact. I'll give you one example on that. So the first theme where we started doing investments was big data, so 3-4 years back. And it was just starting out. By now, some of the companies that we've invested under that theme, we've ended up acquiring. So it shows that there is value coming out of enabling future innovation by doing that.
I mean, Simon, you're doing it purely financial, right?
Yeah.
And so what's the rationale? I mean, Rakuten is a huge company. Yeah. Why do they think you're going to do it better than if they just gave the money to a traditional VC?
I convinced them that I'm better, but I'm really not. But
they should hire you for sales.
I know. But if you actually look behind the veil in terms of what happens with corporate investments, there is a very ambiguous line between strategic investment and what we deem as pure CVC. And in many ways, when they really get down to it, how do you do really financially driven investments as a corporation really depends on the qualitative relationship that the GP, the general partner, has with the CEO of the company. And this is real. It's in terms of For example, like how much does the CEO of the Alphabet company trust the general partner of Google Ventures? Is basically what it really comes down to. Now that kind of has matured as these investment firms have been able to actually get investments online, and corporate-wise, it has been a little bit more easy to swallow that they'll actually invest raw liquidity in these companies. But definitely for every single company that you look at who has a CVC, you really have to understand the GP's motivation and the amount of trust that the GP has with the very head, the money holder, the CFO, the CEO, to understand whether that person is a strategic investor or a corporate investor.
So how much trust do you have? Like if you want to invest in a pizza chain, could you do that?
I mean, as of now, I say I could, but I mean, then I'd be needing to operate a pizza chain. So not really, I guess, yeah.
Fair enough. Maurizio, you're right in the middle of this. You deal with traditional, you've got this really cool, campus where you have all these amazing entrepreneurs coming and venture capitalists. How was the experience as a founder? And you see founders that are funded from corporate venture capital, CVC, and traditional venture capital. From the founder's perspective, how's the experience different?
That's a very interesting question, this one, because for a founder of a startup, it's a different strategy to approach. The traditional venture capital, it's the best way to go to the top class. Venture capital, as he explained, they want the best performance. And also venture capital, at some point, they have to choose which one to invest more. So the reality is that we will have a massive wave of new entrepreneurs coming from all around the world, and a lot of them that are not interested to the VC to get the next big thing can be a very good support for those low-tech corporations. There are so many in the world that need a new generation of entrepreneurs to help their transformation. So this is a work also, this one, because till now, young people, they dream. Doing startup, internet is like it is like the rock and roll. It's like the pop music for 10 years ago. Young people 10, 20 years ago, they're being inspired by musicians, artists, athletes, Michael Jordan, and all of them. Now it's Zuckerberg, it's different heroes. And everybody wants to do that. But only few can achieve this one because it's so complicated to really create such a company. I see an increasing interest for a lot of startups now to find a business because corporations, they can offer not just money, but they can give them a strategy for the future. And they can provide business, they can provide more things. So from a VC perspective, this is more like a B plan. Because they say, okay, he's an honest guy, he's a nice startup, but I cannot get 10 plus. So, but for corporation, this could be a good opportunity. And I see more and more entrepreneurs addressing their strategy to work with corporations rather than only with VC.
Is there so when founders are weighing this, and I'll throw this out to all of you, is there a discount or premium when you're CVC? Is it more expensive money or is it cheaper money? And I know generally, it's case by case, but let's talk generally here. Pratik, I saw you laughing here. You have an answer.
As I'm reminded by most people, you do deals with money as only one color. So it's neither cheaper or premium. But I do agree with Maurizio's statement that the value add that a corporate can bring is take you to customers. So if you can marry the technology, like Vinay was giving the example of content and then free time, right, airtime, that's what is really valuable to a startup to really scale. So I think that in that way, we do bring a premium to the table along with cash.
Well, I guess a related question would be, how does it affect exits? Because if Cisco's putting money in, that do you guys have a right? Do you guys have a right to eventually, let's say it's a strategic investment, can one of your investments eventually exit to a competitor, and how does that work? I mean, so how did obviously the exit will affect the valuation. So how do you negotiate exits if you're investing in a strategic company?
We'd never ask for anything onerous if we're investing cash. It doesn't make any sense. So I bet everyone on the panel would say the same.
Does anybody else put in clauses that?
I mean, it really depends. And again, we're going back to the kind of the philosophical decision about and discussion about, are you a strategic investment firm or are you a really true blue CVC? And when you're the latter, really, it's about it goes back to how do you increase shareholder value for your company, your mother company. And if you look at the mid to long-term return ratios, the return ratios really pay off when you actually have those companies having a very profitable exit or a very good mutually beneficial trade sale, not necessarily a simple like partnership or some kind of acquisition that was bought off at a discount. So definitely, once you actually have a stabilized CVC, it really goes back to how does that CVC optimize for the shareholder value and play their part to increase the market cap.
Is it related? Is a typical CVC more patient with the money? I would think in theory you would be, right? Because you don't have the kind of the forced 10-year timetable or whatever it is.
You actually bring up a really, really good point where CVC's one of the biggest advantages of a CVC is patience. For a commercial VC firm, patience is very, very expensive, almost unforgivably expensive. If you run a 7+3 or an 8+2 fund year life cycle, by the end of 4 or 5, if you have not invested most of your capital, you're really, really in big trouble because you have to actually manifest those into a valuation uptick. So being able to be basically non-transient capital in the perspective of I can afford to do one investment per year is a very, very powerful statement for the actual GP to make and to be able to make.
And then what about in terms of letting the startups gestate longer?
Yes.
I mean, it's probably the same thing, right? There's probably more leeway to kind of let them go without having to force some kind of exit within your fund.
You keep on making really, really great points because it's that a lot of CVCs can do exactly the opposite of what other commercial VC firms are doing, which is the shotgun methodology. And you can actually make the inverse of doing less investments, but put more liquidity in existing portfolio companies.
Pratik, what's the longest? Cisco's been doing this a really long time. So you're like one of the pioneers. Cisco's one of the pioneers in CVC. What's the longest that Cisco has kind of let a company gestate under its venture arm?
Yeah, so I think I agree with Sam on that particular point. We are not driven by a fund horizon. So in my own portfolio, there are examples where even after IPO, they've asked us to stay on, right? So because there's a particular value we are bringing to the table as a partner, as opposed to just a plain old investor, where we've continued to be with the company.
Vinay, you have an interesting model because what you're really doing is taking corporate assets and turning them into, you're monetizing them through investments. When you look at companies, or actually when people pitch you, I mean, how do they value, and again, for a lot of companies, it's a very alluring model. Do people value corporate assets as dearly as cash?
It's a really interesting question. I've been surprised how much they wanted us to take a 3% equity stake in their business. I felt like, versus like VC money, they value the brand and the projection. So I've been surprised by that.
I mean, CBS, I remember, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, pioneered that model. They had Sportsline and MarketWatch, and they were doing a similar thing. So it's interesting to see you guys come back with this.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting way to leverage your asset base in an open economy. So if you can fit into the life cycle of a company where marketing is clearly a route to a key part of a consumer-facing company's evolution, and you got something unique, then yeah. I'm working with 12 broadcasters in Europe who are all doing the same model. So in theory, I could take a deal and roll out to 12 countries in Europe.
The knock on, and I'll throw this to anybody, and maybe Maurizio, you want to take a first stab at this. The knock on corporate venture capital is that it seems to, at least historically, kind of ebbs and flows with market values. Like, it's a lot more when all of a sudden everything kind of collapses, a lot of corporations just pull back, where the professional venture capitalists are stuck staying with it. Is that changing? Maurizio, you want to take a first stab at that? You've seen a few cycles.
Yeah, I see, it's an evolution. There is an evolution. It's for the first 10 to 15 years since it started the digital economy, it was the traditional, we have to thank the traditional venture capital because they have the competence, they have the money, they helped all these successful startup and project we see in the market comes with the help of the venture capital. So now it's normal, the impact, it's relevant. We see in the automotive, Tesla is driving a new generation of automotive. We saw first with the web, we saw the media, the social networking, the application of so many companies succeeding with the venture capital. So they are having an impact. They are inspiring corporations to move. They have to move into this space. So the corporate venture capital, it's a good vehicle for those corporations to enter into this space, because I see the difference of culture in between the startup and the corporation. It is completely, corporation cannot handle, are not appealing for a young entrepreneur to come to work with a company. So they need to find a way to enter and to get out of the company, move out of the corporation and go out of the comfort zone. Because the problem for corporation is moving out of the comfort zone and entering this new scenario. So the corporate venture capital is a good tool. And I see it's changing a lot now compared with a few years ago. Also the budget. The budget of the company in the past, it was mostly in the R&D, and the corporate venture capital were kind of small. Now it's moving, because part of the budget from the R&D, from marketing, they can be addressed to strategically making different investments. So this is how I see. I don't know, you guys.
I think I would agree with that. It does go through some cycles, because Randall, to your point, like if the professional venture capital is hurting, we usually co-invest in deals with VCs, and if they are slowing down, evaluations are irrational, you do see a cycle, and corporate venture capital is also impacted. But Maurizio has a good point, right? In the digital work nowadays, or especially over the past maybe 1 to 2 years, there's a lot of solution building where it's not just engineering that you're collaborating with, you're collaborating with wide variety of business functions.
We're going to go to the audience, and we have a question that's getting the most votes right now. I'm going to put it up on the screen. All right, so we just talked about patient capital, CVCs and patient capital. Corporations, public corporations often operate on a quarter-by-quarter basis. So how does that affect whether or not you can be patient?
I didn't get the middle part of it.
No, the quarterly pressures of a public company and how that affects your patience. Mr. $100 billion market cap company, I ask you first.
So I think it depends on the ratio. So, as I said, 2 billion active portfolio. Cisco's revenues annually has been touching in the $50+ billion space. Our portfolio is audited internally every quarter, and we do put it as part of our earnings as an aggregate, and then an external auditor comes and values it at the end of our fiscal year. So, I think it's a question of how much disruption and innovation. I think specifically for Cisco, what I can say is, if you look at the entire history, it has always understood that innovation cannot happen organically. It will happen inorganically, and we have to capture that. So our growth strategy is pretty much built on the foundation that we are going to invest and acquire. So that's how I think we treat it as.
There's a second part of the question that you're qualified for. How many CVCs have existed for more than 20 years? When did you guys start?
93, so we'd make that list.
So we have one.
I think Intel Capital is probably older and has a bigger active portfolio than Cisco does.
We got two, okay. But I think we will see more, though. I agree that that folks are new. Who does it? A question to the whole panel. Who does, not yourselves excluded, who does it best? Who do you guys admire in terms of how they do CVC, and what can we learn from them? Time to plug a competitor.
I mean, if you look at how, like, if you look at the exercise of venture capital and who does it best in the most aggressive or most militant way possible, I think Google Venture is a really good example of that. I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Qualcomm and Intel Capital, and actually Cisco has been consistently in that space, in that they have a discipline and they're going to stick to that discipline. And I think if you look at the aggregate portfolio of these companies, it just shows the variety that they're going after.
I'd agree with that.
That's tech companies. Yeah. I see also an interesting project is the BMW corporate garage project. So it's because Google Ventures comes from a tech company, so they are very conscious about to do this one. It's interesting also to see how traditional companies are now approaching. And that's a nice example because they created a team of people. They are to scout, they go inside the startup environment and ecosystem to learn more, to acquire or to invest.
Thinking actually about H-Farm in Italy, it just traditionally, this is for everybody, venture capital likes to invest locally. They want to be able to be close to their companies, they want to be able to touch them, they want to be able to smack them when they're not doing well, and hug them when they need a hug. But it seems, even universally on this panel, that's not as big a deal. I mean, Simon, it's a giant Japanese company, and they have you down here.
Yeah.
What explains that?
I mean, the thing is that Rakuten Venture is kind of we're in a different generation of venture capital where we have 10 investments, and out of that, 3 of those investments, I did not meet the founder in person before I invested in the company. And for me, and I guess you use the jargon sniping. I'm very, very comfortable with sniping startups from a couple of thousand miles away. And what gives me the opportunity to do so is, number one, is that Rakuten Venture has a very long-term plan about how it wants to build out not a strategic moat, but more so a strategic business that'll develop great portfolio companies. And at that, you need to couple that with a differentiating factor. And that differentiating factor is that the fact that when we invest from Singapore to the US, for example, we automatically bring the cross-border benefits of all the networks that we have in North Asia and Southeast Asia. And this brings a lot of benefit to the company, but also the fact that because we're not constricted by geography or vertical discipline, our flexibility is our biggest weapon towards not only helping ourselves, but helping our portfolio companies perform better. So we have multiple portfolio companies that work with each other very actively just because it makes sense to do so.
Okay. I'm going to go to another one from the audience. We have the Forbes Under 30 Summit coming up this week in Singapore. And somebody asked about millennials and the pivot towards the next generation. That's something, obviously, we're seeing, especially in the States, about having a comfort with investing in very, very young founders. How do corporate funders feel about giving $100 million to a 23-year-old? Pratik, I see a couple 23-year-olds out here who would like to meet you. So what do you think?
So I was watching on a similar panel at a different conference, and one of the CEOs said, and I think it's true for some of us, I don't want to claim for everybody, that we actually belong to the uncle generation, right? We'll really like to still write our, don't take it too hard, you know, we still like to write our emails on the laptop, especially if it's an important one, whereas the millennials are not doing that. And if you look, for example, for this one, I think like crowdfunding, right? If you take that as an example, it's happening. It's in, you know, funding. I've been trying a couple out just to experiment with it. These are good models.
Yeah. I mean, for Rakuten Venture, we've already invested millions of dollars into, you know, like companies that have been run by very young people. I think the one company that a lot of people know in Southeast Asia is Carousel. You know, we invested in Carousel when basically, you know, it was just a company of just 3 youngsters, and they wanted to build a C2C mobile marketplace. Now it's a dominant mobile marketplace for multiple countries. So in terms of the comfort level, I think it really depends on, for me as a VC, do I see in the same direction, the same goal point as the founders, and how contextual and smart are they about their areas of activity? And if those kind of tracks align, we've never been shy about investing very aggressively and making sure that they have the resources that they need.
There's a question here about, it's getting a lot of votes. We discussed a little bit about whether it's negative, whether there's a premium or discount to CVC. I want to take this question and pivot a little. How does it work? Do you ever co-invest with traditional venture capitalists?
Definitely.
Yeah, I do. We plug into rounds. We get deal flow from VCs. Yeah. It helps, I'd say.
Yeah. I think one way to look at it, I mean, do we do business with some of our competitors? Yes, we do. So we co-invest with our competitors as well in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's the 21st century or the 22nd century, how you look at it, but everyone's a friend and enemy, right? So, in terms of, you know, how we invest, as long as this investment spectrum brings the maximum benefit to the founders and increases their rates of success, you know, we'll invest with anyone, and we're very honored, even if the commercial VC firms who are well known are willing to invest with us, because we understand that in many ways, being an Asian company and also a CVC gives us a reputational disadvantage compared to the other commercial venture capital firms, especially if you're actively working in Silicon Valley or the more learned places.
How do you guys, related to that, how does deal flow work? I mean, kind of traditional VCs, we understand how deal flow works. How is deal flow different for CVCs?
It's not any different. I bet everyone here is from a corporate venture or
well, you're inherently different because you don't have cash. You're offering services. So do they find you? Do you find them? How does that work?
I think if you put your hand up and you say you're offering money or something here, the deals just flow. So it's not a challenge at all.
For Rakuten Venture, it's a little bit different. Like out of the 10 investments we've done, we've only actually taken 1 as a referral. We kind of use a model that's more related to hedge funds, where we do thematic investments. We look at what's going to happen in the next year, and then we start to focus on specific verticals that we can possibly exploit or have a lot of economic benefit to.
Okay. Let's see. Question. Actually, I want to ask one question before that because we have about 4 minutes left. The question everyone wants to ask everybody who has a lot of money: are we in a startup bubble or not? I'm going to go right around all the way around the horn. Pratik, you get to go first. So come right to me. Are we in a startup bubble, evaluation bubble?
I think there are pockets of bubble, definitely, both from geographical point of view as well as thematic point of view. You want me to call some of them out, or? So I think India, for example, is going through a correction right now. I think last year was too high, and we all read about that. I think from a domain perspective, I feel big data, the valuations are pretty high as well. Again, it's becoming a little sane, but not as much.
Seaman, what do you think?
Yeah, I really liked how Pratik talked about the bubble. Is that if you talked about the bubble in 2011-12, you're looking at an industry-specific wide inflation of companies and the non-sustainability. But when you look at 2015 and 16 on, we're looking at specific vertical sets that have actually ballooned up into giant pillars. And you will definitely see micro and macro contractions of those specific verticals. So as in India, you'll see e-commerce. You can't have a company lose $300 million a year and still call themselves a $10 billion company. It's very hard to do that in any fairy tale, right? So let me not name the company, but yeah. But then we look at things such as, yes, big data. We have a lot of companies like Horton Works go into a harder life cycle. We have things such as fintech, looking at kind of the next generation of things. And we have companies that have IPO'd in their second generation of kind of the late 2015s, and we're seeing consistent contractions. So again, not a large, like startup industry-wise contraction, but very vertical-specific contractions will happen and affect valuations.
Okay. Maurizio, you have thoughts on valuations?
Yeah, I believe that the bubble comes once there is a lot of interest in specific investment in specific space, and once there are only few players, and if the players are only financial perspective, they of course they have as main goal is getting high returns. But today the market I see more under control because we're getting more player, and also the corporation they play a role which is less speculative. So they are more strategic, and we can see how the bubble it was a couple of years ago. I saw last year was the password was unicorn. Everybody was running for a unicorn. I want to make a unicorn, but we're going to see that now unicorn is calma. And but we have more perspective for the investment. So I'm more confident about the bubble. That's of course, once there is more demand, it's getting hot, certain space, everybody wants to go to invest there, and of course valuation raise. But I don't see situation like was in the past because we really need the technology. We really need to change the world, and we can do it only with the technology. So for sure, we're going to have some unicorns that burst, and we're going to have some undervaluated startup that they can do their own. It's just completely different scenario. So I don't see the bubble as it was.
Vinay, thoughts on
I tend to agree with that. So you compare the 2001 bubble to today, and I'd say we're in a diametrically different place. So there's way more e-commerce, mobile commerce is a reality, smartphone penetration. So the correction is probably necessary, but it won't be as deep as the one we felt in 2001. I also think that some of the high-profile valuations are misreported because those late-stage investors are putting hugely onerous terms for their benefit, and that distorts the valuation. So they get a high notional value, but it's only one shareholder who's benefiting in all liquidation scenarios. So there's the way some companies have reported their valuations.
And I think there is some perspective to unicorns as well. If you took, and Forbes, we did a cover story on this. If you took every unicorn in the world, every pre-IPO, every billion US private startup, you put it in a basket and you took all their valuations, even at the high watermark valuations, it would be Uber, Airbnb, all of them. It's still worth less than the market cap of Microsoft. So people are going around, screaming hair on fire, the world's going to end, Chicken Little. Nobody's worried about Microsoft stock value. And which would you rather, you could say there's the bubble, which would you rather have, Uber, Airbnb, all the way down the line, every unicorn you guys invested in, or Microsoft? I'd probably take the basket, but so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Speaking of unicorns, we have the pitch, I believe the pitch battle's coming up. Maybe you guys will find some companies to fund. But I want to thank everybody here for a good panel, and it's a trend that's not going anywhere. So get to know these guys because they got a lot of money and they're here to stay. But thank you again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, nice.